Okay, welcome everybody to this post-lunch session. My name is Sujata Gosh and I am from Indian Statistical Institute, Chennai, and I will be speaking on game logics. So, there has been a lot of work done in the past 30 years, like on game logics, and though more so in the past decade. And you can well imagine like 1 hour time is not enough to talk about all the work that has been done. So what I would do is today is I would try to give you some flavor of the kind of work that has been done in this area of game logics. Okay, now since this is a school on logical aspects, seminar on logical aspects of multi-agent system, let me start with talking about a bit about multi-agent systems. So in multi-agent systems, there is a lot of kind of interactions that goes on, some negotiations happen, some group decision making happens, coalitions get formed, like lots of things that these kind of things that go on, some bargaining happens, and all these things are kind of many two to many player procedures, two to many player systems, and they can be ideally modeled by games. And in general, and thus the logics that talk about games in a way plays an important role to talk about such issues as well, as we can apply such kind of logics there as well. So that's one of the motivation one can say to study these game logics from the perspective of multi-agent systems. So I will start with kind of a disclaimer, because Sunil gave a very nice lecture on game theory yesterday, and he basically talked on like what is known as the normal form games or strategic form games. But today, as I just talked about interactions happening, some negotiations happening, and some some moves are made in response to which some other moves are made. So such kind of stuffs which we will be dealing today, we will be more focused on what is known as the extensive form games. And you don't need to go into that jargon at all. You need just to remember that it's kind of turn based games, and which can be represented by, let's say, player 1 playing some actions A, B, and followed by like any kind of such trees, like player 2, 3 here playing some C, D, E, F. Such kind of structures we will be mostly talking about in this games. Okay, so let's start. So as I said, we will be talking about logics on games and strategies, and intermittently we will talk about like some examples of multi-agent systems, and we will also in between we will discuss certain open questions, and towards the end we will discuss some further research directions. Okay. Okay, in general, as you have seen in Hans's talk, in Olivier's talk, like logic generally deal with, as logicians, when we define some logical language or define some semantics, we talk about axiomatization, like building up sound and complete action systems. We talk about decidability of the satisfaction model checking problems, if they are decidable, how complex the procedure is, and then we talk about what kind of properties of the model that we can express in such logics, and how succinct, today itself Hans talked about succinctness of logics. So I am not saying the logicians should only see these kind of issues, but that's what they generally do. For today's talk, we will be, because of there are certain open issues related to axiomatization, we will talk a little bit about when we present different systems of logics of games and strategies. We will talk about some axiomatization as well as some kind of what kind of issues they can express, because we are ultimately we would like to talk about multi-agent systems. So that's what we are going to do. Okay. So regarding reference, whatever I am going to whatever I am going to talk about today is mostly inside this. This is basically like some 50-page lecture notes, which was compiled like what myself and Ramanujam gave like the joint lectures during the European Summer School of Logic, Language and Information in 2011, and there was a compiled lecture notes which is there in this LNCS 7388. So, mostly this talk today is, you can find all the things that I am going to talk about there, almost all the things, and we will make this available as well. Okay. So, we start with game logic. This was proposed by Rohit Parikh in 1985. That's kind of started this whole area of game logics, and what he talked about in that logic was determined two-person zero-sum games. We already saw what we mean by zero-sum games. It's just that one's win is the other's loss. One's win is the other's loss, and what does it mean by being determined? One of the players has a winning strategy. And in game, so the idea is you can, like, why this picture? This picture is basically to give you some idea that there's an infinite game board kind of thing, and you can start from anywhere in the game and end at some subset of these points, and anywhere in this place. The whole kind of actions, utilities, they are kind of, we won't kind of glossed over in this logical system. We won't talk about that. Our point of interest is we'll starting from some set what we can achieve and where we can go. So that's our main, and we will look into compositional combined games and how does what kind of properties would we have when we combine games and such things. That's what we would look about. That's what Rohit Parikh did as well. Okay. And for an example, so consider this game. As I said, it's kind of the extensive form game that I talked about, this racing to 100. So the two-player game, I choose let's say a number from 1 to 10, then you choose another number from 1 to 10, and we add up. Whoever goes to 100 first, whoever reaches 100 first wins the game. Of course, it's a zero-sum game. One's win is the other's loss. Is it determined? Does one player have a winning strategy? Sorry?
Both the players have winning strategy.
Both the players together will have winning?
No, one will win, of course.
No, but
both of them will try to win.
Yeah, both of them will try to win, but can you think of
one
who starts first? So how will he win? Yeah, tell me.
Choosing the bigger number first, you have to choose between 1 to 10.
1 to 10, then the other player will start again, will respond with another number from 1 to 10, and then you add up.
And the other player will start could maximum choose the number which I have chosen first, because that is the limit. We have a limited.
Yeah. So suppose I choose 10. Suppose I start the game first. I choose 10.
Okay.
Then.
So one has to reach 100 first anyhow.
Yeah.
So the other person will try to compete, and maximum he can do is come up with another 10. But you are the one who is going to finish it first.
Let me not just say it was. Please think about it a bit more, and we can discuss this again. Who has a winning strategy? It's a bit. Just think about it a bit more. Huh? We'll come back to this. So, but my claim is it is a determined game. One of the players does have a winning strategy, which is kind of obvious, but the question is who has the winning strategy? That's more interesting, and what's the winning strategy? But we can come back to that later. Another example is, thanks to Olivier, who already introduced these evaluation games in the morning today, we can think of a modal formula and a Kripke structure, a pointed Kripke structure, which is nothing but just a Kripke structure, Kripke model with a world in it. So given that and given a modal formula, play this game, verifier and falsifier. That's also again another extensive form game, and verifier would choose whenever there's an or diamond formula, verifier will take the action, and whenever there's the other, whenever there's an and box, the falsifier would take that. So these kind of games, as you can see, what the game logic that we are talking about can talk about such very real actual games that we just said, the racing to 100 games, and also these kind of logic games which are in some abstraction level. That's one of the beauty of game logics, and in any case as logicians, one of the thing that we try to do is to build up a logic at the right abstraction level regarding what we want to describe. That's also one of the goal as logicians. Okay. So from that, what's the syntax of the game logic? So this is a proposition, the usual Boolean formulas, and there is this diamond, gamma, phi, and then you have certain game operators. What are these operators? This calls for sequential composition, which means first play gamma 1, game gamma 1, and then play gamma 2. Then there is the choice, non-deterministic choice, either choose either game gamma 1 or game gamma 2. Then there is the iteration operator, continue with finite playing gamma finitely many times, and then there is the dual operator where this is a two-player game. Again, the negation thing that Olivier talked about in the morning. So it's a similar kind of idea. The player changes the role. It's a dual game. The player changes the role. So of course, now I just threw you with some jargon with this kind of syntax. So the question could be that where do these operators come from? How do we interpret these operators? How do we interpret diamond gamma phi? So that's the natural question that will come to your mind if you have not seen it earlier. I don't know. How many of you do know propositional dynamic logic? Have you seen? Okay, so not many. So good. So of course we had some sequential composition, some choice. Where do these operators come from? So if we think of, but we all know this regular expressions and the equivalence between the regular expressions and the finite automata, finite behavior, state level behaviors, which Kleene proved in 1953. So the regular expressions are kind of built up with atomic programs, and then like composition, non-deterministic choice and iteration, and Kleene showed that they are enough to capture the all kinds of finite state behaviors. And such programs, if you think of like a model, can be thought of as starting from some state S, ending in a set of states. A program can be thought of as a mechanism starting from some state S, ending in some set of states, or in other words, kind of from starting from state S, it can achieve some set of states X, or we can say as a strategy. Program can be thought of as a strategy of there is no player here, but still we can thought of as some, let's say, nature, the player nature, having a strategy of reaching X or achieving X. Now these programs can also be thought of as starting from some states where phi holds and ending at some states where psi holds. So to talk about such properties, there is this logic which talk about which takes propositions, Boolean formulas, and this diamond pi phi. What does it say? There is an execution of the program pi from the current state, after which when states phi holds. This is the interpretation of this formula. I won't go into the details of this logic, but this is what is known as the propositional dynamic logic, which is a very useful, very let's say it is used to express a lot of things about programs, their behavior and all these things. But since this is I will just giving you some introduction. If you are interested, you can, there is a very nice book of Harrell and others on dynamic logic. You can have a look at this book also, and there are lots of papers available over the net. And again, once again, these programs can be thought of also as maps from power set of S to power set of S, where how that it's interpreted, it can be interpreted as starting from Y by the program pi, X can be achieved, or nature has a strategy to achieve X. This is kind of the game theoretic interpretation that one can give to programs? Okay. So now, in general, when we have programs, so what is, we already had PDL. What is the second player? And we talked about game logic which has two players. And as you have seen that the operators, if you remember, the operators kind of the same, will just go in there except for the dual operator. But then if you have just the programs with only one player, what is A? How do you interpret A plus B semicolon C plus D? First some A or B is played, then some C or D is played. But as soon as you give the two player thing, you can say that first player 1 plays A or B, then player followed by player 2 playing C or D. And then you can think of that player 2 being the dual player. One player sequential composition of a player and his opponent, while one player playing A, B and the opponent playing C, D, these kind of things. So as you can see that adding the second player, in fact it can be proved, it is also a technical result that this game logic is much more expressive, than the propositional dynamic logic. But even intuition will kind of tells you that such thing happens as well. Okay. Now coming back to game logic, so this is the infinite kind of game board that we were talking about. This is the syntax that we talked about. This is basically the program syntax, and we have added this gamma D. And as you can see, the motivation kind of comes from those logic games where we had negation and we expressed it as the dual operator here. And how do we have the semantics? Again the same thing, like starting from some state S, player has a strategy to achieve some set of states X, the similar kind of interpretation, which is termed here as effectivity relation. It's a subset of S cross 2S, power set of S. Okay. By the way, is it clear up till now? No, it's just gamma there. So what sorry. It is to, sorry.
Using propositional variables.
Yeah.
And also E's, and also you are using G's.
Yeah.
So are they of different, while composing formally, are you using both these?
Yes, definitely. Yes, sorry. Yes, definitely. It is, sorry. It is, we are using this gamma. This gamma can be of this form, and then we are using that gamma here. Okay? That's what we are doing here.
You cannot make some sort of, you cannot use disjunction simply between two commas.
That's,
No, that is a different symbol.
it's kind of the choice operator. Either do program, or either play game gamma 1 or play game gamma 2. Yeah, it's not the connective that this disjunction. That's, yeah, exactly. It's not this connective. So, sorry, good, thank you for the question, I didn't explain it properly. So, these are atomic games, somewhere you start with those games and then you combine. Okay, that's atomic games and you combine, and simply these are atomic propositional variables and then you combine complicated formulas. These are atomic games and you combine them to form more complex games. Okay. Any other question? Okay. Good. So, so as you can see, the semantics is given by the set of states S. For each atomic game gamma, atomic game G, we have these relations, effectivity relations EG and the valuation function. And how does this, how does the diamond gamma phi is said to be true, is satisfiable in S, at S in M, if there exists a strategy like X can be achieved from S under this relation E gamma, such that at all points of X S phi holds, such that at all points of S, X phi holds. This is the semantics of the diamond gamma operator. It says that there exists a strategy, sorry, there exists a strategy in game gamma to ensure phi. Okay.
Sometimes you can choose.
You keep it in hand.
Okay, you have to keep it that also in hand. Okay. Yeah, it's okay. Okay. So I'm not going to. So as you can see that these are only defined for games G, and then for the composite games, we can define by by the usual way, like we kind of, this is the effectivity functions formed out of the effectivity relations, which is the same as like pi x equal to y. Starting from y, x can be achieved, and starting from s, x can be achieved. The same idea, and then you combine, like this is the choice is the union, this is the complement. Anyway, so you can look at this later. So this is how the composite game structures are defined. Okay. Now, what kind of validities do this logic have? So, as we saw that it's a determined game. So, we have that either phi can be achieved, either player 1 has a strategy achieve phi, or player 2 has a strategy not phi. Okay. So, note that we are not having players in the modality, because it's enough to talk about strategy of one player, because for the other one you can use the dual game to define the strategy for the other player. So, we are not using the player name in the modality. And once again also it's not the case that the two players can have winning strategies together at complementary positions. That's also cannot happen. That's by this formula. So these are kind of some of the validities of this logic. Okay. So for the axiom system, all propositional tautologies and inference rules, and then these are the kind of the reduction axioms which reduces to simpler games. The idea is same kind of idea that Hans talked about when he was talking about public announcement logic. You are reducing it to simpler games except for iteration, but it kind of works out. You can have a look to have how this completeness proof works. I would recommend you to look at like for the PDF, which is there in the modal logic book of Ide Fenema. All these references are mentioned in the main reference that I talked about. Please have a look at the reference to talk about. But note that this whole axiom system is sound, but not complete.
The star or plus?
Sorry? Gamma star? If and only phi or? Sir? No, it's or. Phi or? No, it's, yeah, it's or phi or star. Anyway, whether now the question is whether this axiom system is sound and complete. Sound means whether they are all valid in the models, and complete means whatever those are valid can be proved as a theorem for this logic. So is it true?
I think that gamma plus is talking about this gamma into gamma star. So plus means at least one gamma should be there.
Sorry, I didn't get.
So gamma plus source, at least one gamma you should have. That's why you said you don't need.
Don't need. It's there. Phi. Sorry. Phi is there. Okay. If and only phi or. Okay. Okay. So the axiom system is definitely sound, but it has not been. So the Parikh proposed this logic in 1985. Now it's 2015. It is still an open problem to prove the completeness of this axiom system. Parikh conjectured it that it's complete, but this is still an open problem. But without the iteration, the dual fragment of the logic has been proved to be complete, and without dual, the iteration fragment of the logic has been proved to be complete. This dual iteration coming together has been a real problem for providing completeness of the logic. So this is one of the big open problems that is still there in game logic.
So without dual, it's like
Pro-
PDL?
Yeah, it's like PDL. It's kind of called the program fragment of the game logic without dual. It's the PDL. Okay. Okay, let's not go into some remarks regarding this. As I just mentioned in the beginning of the talk, that here, like Sunil mentioned about utilities, actions, which are kind of the main constituents when you talk about games in game theory. But here it's kind of abstracts out those things. It's kind of detached from those issues, not those points, but one can bring in the utilities as propositions, atomic propositions. One can bring in the utilities. That's where then you can talk about games with utilities as well, such games with utilities. Without them, it's generally traditionally called the game forms, and game logic, we call it, it's a logic of the game forms, not of the games, not with games with utilities, but just the game forms, where we reason about such game forms and what can be achieved there. Okay. Now there can be, so as we have seen that game logics are, like we assumed in the first place, that these are two-person determined zero-sum games. So there is a lot of scope of what happens when it's not a two-person, more than two-person games. When it's non-determined, the deterministic condition, when such games where the deterministic condition doesn't, what happens if there are overlapping objectives, like the cake cutting problem, like cutting a cake between two persons. The way to go is I cut, you choose. That this kind of an example of overlapping objectives. So these kind of situations, what to do? So, and then we only talked about the sequential composition, iteration, and dual and tells, but there can be other interesting game operators as well, which could be useful to talk about certain interactive systems. So these kind of extensions we can think of regarding game logics. First, so the general case is, if you have an n-person game logic, then you have to plug in the player, like I am talking about, where n is greater than 2. Sorry. And then the syntax is the kind of the same, and except for this part where I is added, and this in the semantics would be same, but for this I would be added. But now there are various questions that one could think of, like how to define what could be a semantics of this logic. Like if you think of the choice, non-deterministic choice of games, what does it mean to say non-deterministic choice of games? Who chooses? Like in general, either gamma 1 or gamma 2 is chosen, and then the play continues there. That's the idea. But then who chooses here? Okay.
What is semantics of the atomic G comma I?
Even if you take like the same thing, S comma X, some S comma some X.
What is I doing?
So it's n-person games. So now rather than G, you will have something like SEIGX. So it's for the n-person, because you cannot in the game logic that we just saw, one person's achieve or power can be represented equivalently as in terms of the other player. But when we have more than two, well, like in such cases, then they doesn't.
You said G comma I5, G comma I2 or something like that. Do you mean that
I has the power, has a strategy in the, yeah, well, okay, I has the strategy in the game G to achieve phi. That's what I mean. Okay. So, what kind of validities? We earlier saw that this is a validity for the two-person game logic. Will it still hold? Okay. So, yeah, I would just put these questions for you. I won't go into any other discussion here. So, you can think about it. Yeah. Okay. Coming to other reasonable constructs, we had choice, sequential or composition and iteration. So, one can think of playing games in parallel. Concurrency is a very important notion, and playing games concurrently or playing games parallel. So, one can think of such kind of a composition operator. What would be a logic with all these operations together with parallel composition coming to place? And the way we will do today is we will define two ways of talking about the parallel composition. One will be kind of the intersecting mode, like where you just intersect the forcing relations, and the other is the interleaving mode, where it's more like you can play the games parallel, like you play first game up to a bit, then you play the second game up to a bit, then you come back to the first game, and things like this. This is what I mean by interleaving. So, for the intersection thing is the same as the neighborhood the neighborhood models that were discussed. Please note that this is also kind of the neighborhood. We don't have the, this is kind of the neighborhood interpretation also. We are having a relation between a state and a set of states. So, similar kind of model will be there for the intersection idea of parallel composition, and for interleaving idea, because we are interleaving between two games, we will take this tree structure and we will talk about such models there. Now, for the simultaneous games, what we do is we just lift the, I will give you, just please wait, I will just give you an example in a moment. For simultaneous games, what we do is we just lift this operator. At present, it was like operator between s and 2 to the power s. It's a relation between s and 2 to the power s. What we'll do here is, now we will make it a relation between s and set of states. Okay. Why do we do that? So, the whole idea is, because of time, I won't go into this comment. If you have please ask me later as well. It means that we cannot, when we talk about simultaneous games, we can no longer be in the framework of determined games. Non-determined kind of games comes in. May not be the case, like either player has a winning strategy. All these kind of situations might creep in. Even if even if the constituent games are determined, if you combine them in a certain way, these kind of ways, even then that combination, the parallel composition of such games would become non-determined. Okay. That's the idea, that's what I am talking about.
First game was non-deterministic.
Sorry?
First game you said that was deterministic.
That was deterministic. No, the first game I was talking about, the real reaching 100. that one of the players, that's what I wanted you to think about, that one of the players does have a winning strategy. It is determined. It is a determined game. Okay. Now, consider this example. So, the one in this only one plays, in this only two plays. In this kind of a cooked up example, player 1's ability is to reach phi as a strategy. It's very simple example, to reach psi and here. And for player 2 in this game will reach phi or psi, and here for player 1 alpha or beta. So, what happens if you combine them in the set theoretic way, intersect them? In the parallel game, it's phi and alpha or phi and beta, or another strategy would be psi and alpha or psi and beta. Same for the other player. So, that is the main idea here. So, in general, yeah, becomes non-deterministic. Yeah. So, the thing is each of this state is read conjunctively, whereas in between it's read disjunctively, like phi and alpha or phi and beta. So, that is the idea of reading these things. So, that is what happens when you bring in the simultaneous games. Okay. Once again, we have given the syntax, and this is kind of this is an action system for the simultaneous game logic. What I would like you to focus on is this thing. What does this say? This is the parallel operator. It just says that gamma cross is the same as, if it can achieve phi, has a strategy to achieve phi in both the games. Okay. Now, there is a kind of a problem. Let me skip this thing. Yeah. Okay. Now, what happens if both are the same? Then it just becomes gamma cross gamma I, if and only if gamma I has a strategy in gamma. But generally, when you talk about parallel games, there are two games. You cannot just this is a problem when you look at different kinds of abstraction level. You don't want to just come to one game only. You would like to get the two games differently. Okay, and one idea would be you play the two games, you copy the strategy from one player to the for a player from one game to the other game. That's the idea. For example, if you consider this question, of course, I do not know how good you play chess. You may be one of you may as well can beat the grandmaster, but let's say I cannot. So, I am a poor mortal in that respect, and how can I have any strategy to win chess in the game of chess against a grandmaster? So, the strategy is simple. Play two games. Okay, play two games against two grandmasters. You start with white in one game, and you do black in the other game. You let the grandmaster play white, you copy it in this game, let the other play, you are basically…
What if his moves are overdone by his?
But at least in one game you will have a winning strategy in that sense. You are copying the strategy.
But that strategy could not be equivalent to this particular strategy, right?
Meaning, no, just for fun, if you think of this.
That strategy might not be,
No, what you was playing, you were just copying the strategy here, and then you see how the player plays here, and then you copy the strategy here. It's the same strategy you are doing in both the games. The same strategy you are doing in both the games. Okay.
his moves will obviously…
So, now we come with this idea. Okay. So, anyway, so with this idea, what is the interleaving game? As I told you, you'll just play one part of the game, then move on to the other game, then move on, come back to this game, and so on and so forth. That's the base idea.
Determined then. isn't the last game determined then?
It can be in a draw as well. Of course, if in this case it might be. If you consider draw together, at least the you won't lose. At least what you can achieve, at least you won't lose. Either you will win in one of the games or you will achieve draw in both the games. Basically, that's the idea. Okay. So basically what happens is some kind of information gets transferred from one game to the other and players strategize in terms of the information transfer. Okay, so atomic games are taken to be finite trees and then you combine games as usual with the extra thing is this parallel composition. Okay. So sequential composition is you put T2, like you have this T1 and T2 as atomic game trees, then putting T2 at both the end nodes of T1, that will give you the sequential composition. But now suppose you take these two games, okay. Now you can consider this, if you parallelly combine it, then there can be many ways to combine it. So what it leads to is basically it leads to a set of games. So one such game can be represented as this, where you play the first game, let the player 2 play in the other game, and note that there is this common player in both the games which would do kind of the, which would do the copying and this thing. That's the idea of this game. So the same, and now this becomes a set. So this is one of the trees that belong to that set. Okay. Now the logic is the same, with the syntax is the same, using that parallel composition operator. I won't, there are a lot of, the idea is the same, that there exists X such that now X is Rij is kind of trees, and at all the leaf nodes phi holes. So which means the idea is the same, there exists a strategy such that so and so holes. The idea is basically the same. I won't go into the details of the semantics, it's a lot. So you come to the reality, I'm not going to explain the axiomatization here, but you can see the how complicated the axiom system is anyway. Okay, so coming back to this one, under certain conditions you can actually show that if one player achieves phi in the game, then in the parallel composition the common player can achieve phi. Okay, one can show this in this logic.
Here it matters who start first. Right.
Yeah.
You are not in the start.
Yeah, in this case, yes. Who depends? Who, in this case, you mean that one is starting first, then player 2 is copying. Yeah, in this example, it's that case. The idea is in one of, this is basically gives you various many trees. The idea is at least in one of those trees, the semantics is such that in one of those trees, phi is achieved by the player LM. The lesser mortal player LM will achieve phi in one of those games. That's the idea. Okay, I will, 15 minutes left, so let me just, so this just shows there is like a toolkit developed based on this, and it's available in the, if you want to play around with it, it's available in this website. Okay, so coming back to games and strategies. So this is a famous quote by Johann van Bentham, that strategies are the unsung heroes of game theory. What does this mean? So till now what we have seen, that in game logic as well as the parallel combination things that we were talking about what can be achieved, and the strategies only remained in the semantics, like there exists a strategy thing. Okay, so now the question is, if you want to reason about strategies, how do you do it? Basically it's, when you are talking about games, what you are talking about basically is strategies, but till now these logic, they do the talking about strategies in the semantics only. Okay, so now if you want to to see how it can be achieved, then you have to somehow bring in strategies into the language as well, not just games. Till now strategies was there in the semantics, not in the syntax, but now if you would like to ask this question how it can be achieved and not only what can be achieved, we would like to bring the strategies explicitly in the language itself. So, then the way one can do things is just plug in the strategies, in some way inside the syntax, okay, and just as names you can do that, or you can also think of the way you compose strategies, you can also think of the way you compose games, you can also think of composing strategies. For example, when it's okay, let me skip this. When it's a game of chess, okay, let's think of the game of chess. Now you have these moves like strategies of castling, forking, pawn exchange, all these things. So what are these? These are kind of local strategies depending on what the others have played, and how do you play the whole game? You're basically combining or composing these strategies to play the game. So in that sense, talking about structured strategies also makes a lot of sense, to build in structures into strategies. So what we will look into is, so there are, before going into structured strategies, let me just say one thing, that there has been a lot of study on games, various logics on studying this, games as well as strategies. Not to games also, just games also, and as well as looking at games and strategies explicitly inside the language. There are various temporal logics, there are various action and agency logics, there are various kind of logics that I've looked into this. And of course, I don't have the time to go into all these things. What I did was, so just tried to give at least one example of a logic that looks into these things, which is kind of in the same flavor that we have started with, the PDL kind of flavor, that I mean dynamic logic kind of flavor. That's the only thing I am doing, but please note that there are various other ways to talk about such things. Okay. Now we think of, as we looked into this example of chess, we are talking about compositional structures, composing strategies. We talk about choosing partial and local plans, and of course the players cannot look into the whole game. So in that sense, players do have limited computational resources, and depending on that they would they would strategize depending on what kind of resources they have. So it makes sense to talk about local plans and then combining them to form some sort of a global plan. That's the idea. And yeah, as I said, okay. So one can think of modeling these strategies as partial relations, and rather than, okay, I have not explained. So let's see this game. So this is the complete game. What is a strategy for player 1 here? A strategy is basically given by one enabled edge where that player is playing, and all possible other edges. Okay, that's usual. Player 1 is a strategy like this, a strategy of player 1, whereas player 2's strategy would be something like this, or something like this. Whatever the other player plays, this is my action, this is what I am going to play. That's the idea of a strategy in a game. So in that sense, when we talk about trees here, okay, so there are, as I just said, there are two ways of talking about such, what can I say, we can view them as having partial relations, not the in general what Okay, I have used these functions, I have not defined it completely. So in general, how the strategies are defined is, whatever the game, whatever big game is, the strategy defines is whenever the player 1 is there, wherever it plays, you define one single move for that player and all possible other moves. Okay, but then you are basically defining it for the whole game. If it's kind of a very large game or games of unbounded duration like chess, then it doesn't make sense, because you don't know, it doesn't make sense to talk about the whole thing as at a single go. It makes sense to talk about partial plans and combining those partial plans. One can think of that way, or one can do is, one can just break this thing into smaller sub games and take strategies as functions there, complete functions there. One can either think of partial plans or partial strategies, or one can think of dividing the game into smaller sub games and look into complete strategies in those smaller games, in the simpler games. This can be done in both kind of ways. What in the remaining time I have, in the 5 minutes I have, I will be talking about this second idea mostly, because it's kind of talking about games and strategies together, and it's the same kind of logic that we are talking about. So what we do here is ensuring local outcomes, and we compose games as well as compose strategies. And in here, like, since these are games and simple sub games and strategies in there, they cannot be treated as different. They somehow has to be treated together, games and strategy, because they can very well ensure where the next game will start. So games and strategies, games, strategies, games, strategies together, they need to do it like that. Okay, the the syntax is like this, the same kind of syntax, but note that now there is a difference. Okay, so what does this in the atomic, for the atomic games? In the atomic games, we take them as pairs, like G is a game and a strategy to achieve psi. Okay, G a game and a strategy to achieve psi. So this is gamma and this is I, the same kind of interpretation we have. So correspondingly we define an Ri gamma. I am not going to go into the details of how we define this Ri gamma. So you can get all those detailed ideas in the notes, and the same semantics idea that we have. Okay, so let's get to an example. For example, if you think of these two games, okay, so H1 and H2, if you combine them sequentially, what you get? You get this game. The reds are player 1, I think, and greens are player 2. You get, if you compose them sequentially, you get these games. And suppose alpha holds here, then you can see that player 1 does not have a strategy in this whole game to achieve alpha. For example, let us say player 1 plays A1, then player 2 might play B1 or B2. As soon as player 2, if player 2 plays B2, there is no way. And even if player, as soon as player 2 plays B2, there is no way to get to alpha. Similarly here. But now if you consider these two games, like suppose you consider the game where player 2 has a strategy in game H1 to achieve beta, followed by that game where there exists a strategy. T means the top, which means there exists a strategy for player 1. What does it say? After player 2, in cases where player 2 achieves beta in this game, player 1 will have a strategy to achieve alpha. That is exactly what it says, because since it is trying to achieve beta, that will ensure player 1 to start at V3 or V6, and then player 1 can go like this and achieve alpha. So these are the things that it can be expressed in such languages. Okay, to end with, what I have talked about is like just brushed up, kind of give you touches of what this whole area is, and we talked about different kind of logics, all in the dynamic logic tradition, whatever we had, all in the dynamic logic tradition. And then in fact in game logic itself, the Parekh's game logic, it basically gives you an algebraic structure. It's a very nice algebraic structure. You could talk about intersection, union of game position, complete game algebra. And now it would be very interesting to see what kind of algebras we would get if we take into the parallel composition, some parallel composition into adding parallel composition to the already existing operations in the game algebra. That's one interesting thing to see. And once again, if you combine with games and strategies, what would be an algebra of the whole, like combinations of such games and strategies? That is one interesting thing. There are some algebraists in the audience, so I thought that I should mention that as well. And then of course this is much more of, let's say, mathematical interest, but I think if we develop some kind of algebra is developed, that would certainly have some algebraic system could be developed for some kind of interactive system as well, but that's very ambitious. But yeah, just to start with. And then you can think of, once you have some kind of a language of strategies, you can think of all possible strategies, whatever kind of strategies you build up with. This is also one of my long term, like I also think ambitious goal, like if one could think of like some structures and some sorry, some kind of way to build up a complete, not, I won't say it would be complete, but the more ways to express whatever possible strategies. This is more related to this area of general game playing. That is a very important area in certain parts of the world, let's just say. And then there are various issues in multi-agent systems, as I started off in the beginning, and using games to model those situations, and then using those logics to reason about such situations. And one example that we have been currently working on is like if you want to achieve a goal without letting other people know. That's a very, I think that's a very interesting issue to think about, trying to achieve a goal without letting the other people know how to do it, and one can describe it as some kind of extensive form games, and one could think of then reasoning, to talk about reasoning in such areas, to use logic to reasoning in such situations. How can you do that? So, and also since there are economic students and also linguistic students here, I thought of mentioning this modeling market conditions and signaling in communication. Things that where you have the entry deterrence games, where there are the incumbents and the entrants, there are lots of potential entrants, and how to strategize to get rid of some entrants and welcome some entrants, let's say, and reputation also there plays an important role. So all these kind of things, if you think of, one can model as games and reason about. These are the kind of areas that one could think of applying in this. And then there are signaling games in communication, which, like, to understand pragmatics, you have the senders and the receivers strategize how to be understood and how to make others understand, and all these things can be also modeled by games. And also like there is a lot of application of evolutionary game theory in the evolution of language as well, where the senders kind of talk about injective maps from events to signals, and then the receiver, if for them an inverse map works, then one could reach some sort of stability there. So these are all the issues that are there in the linguistics which could be talked, which could be described in games. So yeah, with that I end my talk. Thank you. Okay, so before coffee, I would like to do some advertising. So let me do that. So yeah, if you have seen, so there is this Association for Logic in India, which is one of the organizers, like which is under whose auspices this meeting is being held. And recently there was 2 meetings that were held in this last like 4 weeks ago, in the first week of January. There is this Indian conference on logic and applications and Asian logic conference, and there was the young people there. They were very enthusiastic with so many people of logic coming around. So the young people there started off this site. I would like you, all of you, to visit this site. It's kind of a discussion forum, and people are job listings, everything on logic, whatever that is happening here. It's basically run by the young logicians in different parts of India. And if you want to, like if you are interested in logic, want to work in logic, and you can send an email to there, you can, your profile, if you want to have your profile updated in this website, please send an email here. All these things would be uploaded on the website, so you don't, and there is this Google group also, which talks about, which is kind of a discussion forum as well. And if you would like to become members of this group, you can, yeah, I see Ananta here. You can talk to Ananta if you would like to become a member of this group. And also there is a Facebook page that is there. So all the events that are being held, they are being like posted in this page as well. Please keep track of it, whoever of you are in Facebook. So yeah, there are lots of things happening in logic in India, so I would like you to become a part of it. And by coming here, you of course have become members of this Association for Logic. And finally, there is one other announcement that I would like to make. There is this Association for Symbolic Logic, which which is kind of giving off a 2-year free membership for some third developing countries like Brazil, Bulgaria, and India is part of course the developing countries. You could get free membership of writing to them and the whole procedure. And what you will get for this membership is the Journal of Symbolic Logic, Review of Symbolic Logic, the bulletin, and some newsletters for there. If you like to there, and all this how to apply is also in there. Okay, thank you. Let's go for coffee.